All right, very good. So my voice is kind of scratchy today. I think I was yelling at my kids too much last night, and then I don't know what got it, but I'm just a little scratchy today. So bear with me. I was saying today we're going to have fun because we're going to really touch on conversations that I think touches people's nerves a lot more, pulls at their heart a little bit. I know everything we've talked about hopefully gets to your heart. I mean, this is our faith. There's nothing more exciting about that than anything. But today we talk about how the church interacts with the civil realm, politics. Right? So everybody's eyes looked up and go, "Oh no, here we go." We're going to talk about it because I think, personally, I think it's one of the greatest teachings that Martin Luther gave to the world. It's really remarkable. I think, and we'll dive into it. But we can talk about traditions, which is kind of coincidentally, if you were here on Sunday morning, we kind of started this, and I called David, and I like to bounce things off of David a lot, and I told David, I says, I'm not that I'm unhappy, but I'm not real satisfied, I think was the word I used, with where we left our conversation Sunday morning, and so we're going to kind of continue that a little bit more. Anyways, but it's kind of fits, I think, a little bit together with where we were Sunday morning, and so a lot of, I think, just conversations, again, that start to really pull at the heartstrings a little bit more, pulls at our comforts and pulls at our, just where a lot of times, what do they say you can't talk about? Religion and politics, right? And so we're going to talk about both. In the same conversation. But I want to start with a word of prayer. Does someone want to start us off with a word of prayer? I'll just do it. I tell you what, because I'm in front of the camera, I'll do that. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, you've given us incredible gifts, and we're so thankful for all the gifts that we have. Lord, may we be mindful of sometimes the gifts that we don't always recognize, the gift of our government, the gift of laws, the gift of civil order. Lord, it all comes from you, the gift of our community and society and all that is here. Lord, it is all part of your hand and your creation. Help us to recognize that and to interact with it in a way that is bold in our faith, Lord, and appropriate. And so we pray this all in your Son's name. Amen. Before we get into kind of some of that, Article 14 is real quick, real easy. It's just the one line there. And it's referring to ecclesiastical order. When we talk about ecclesiastical order, it's really talking about church governance, right, and government. Just to kind of, I'll try to make this quick and easy. Our church body, we belong to, anybody know, everybody know? It's called the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. That is our governing body. That is our church body. There are other denominations out there. They all belong to their church body. Then you have some that are like, have independent. They belong to no ecclesiastical order. It's just an individual started a church, was successful at it, runs the church, but they're not part of any order. Here's the thing. Denominations are what I call a necessary evil, meaning it's a sign that we live in a broken world, right? The fact that we don't have just one Christian church. Now we do. We talked about this earlier when we talked about the invisible church versus the visible church, but just kind of how things work here in our world. We have, different denominations, and they don't all necessarily agree with one another, and that's okay. We still celebrate unity, and we still celebrate the brothers and sisters we have in other Christian churches, but the reality is there's not a complete 100% unity. That's why Baptists are not Methodists, and that's why Methodists are not Presbyterians, and Presbyterians are not Episcopalians, Episcopalians aren't Lutherans, and Lutherans aren't Catholics, and so forth. That's why we have different denominations. But I think that denominations are a good thing in our broken world. And here's why I believe that. They give order, they give accountability, and they give structure. Because I think one thing that is very dangerous is an autonomous preacher who has none of that. And have we seen this before? Yeah, there are so many examples. Now, are there bad pastors that come out of denominations? Absolutely. But what does the denomination do? They should weed them out. They should find them, say, there's a problem with you. You are no longer welcome to serve this. And then oftentimes what those pastors do is they leave that synod or the denomination and they go and they start their own independent church. We lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I'm trying to think of who it was that was in Baton Rouge. Jimmy Swaggart. Anybody remember Jimmy Swaggart? What happened to Jimmy Swaggart? His church is still functioning. Even though he was thrown in, I think, jail for a while for stealing money and for corruption and all this stuff. You can go to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. It doesn't have near the population that it used to have. But you can still find his church there. There's no accountability there. And this isn't to try to bash Jimmy Swaggart. He's just one that I think of. There's another one in Farmers Branch. Who was that? You'll find them all over the place.
Well,
go ahead.
The one that comes to my mind is in Houston, because that's where I'm from, is John Osteen.
Yeah.
Joel Osteen's dad was actually expelled by the Baptist church.
Yes, he was. And Joel Osteen has no affiliation.
Correct.
He is an independent person. So he does not belong to a denominational body.
He grew a huge ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Being
Even if they do good things, okay, even if they do good things, it's not to say that they can't do good things. I'm trying to think, was Billy Graham? I don't know if he was associated with any church body. He may have been. I really don't know the answer to that question.
I think he was totally independent.
He was independent as well?
With the singer, what was his name?
Well, I was watching that show last week, and he distanced himself from some people who were teaching things that he really was worried about.
So it's not a matter of all people who are independent are bad. That's not what I'm trying to say. There's some really good preachers and do good ministry. I couldn't tell you about Billy Graham, so I don't want to, but no one would say, even if he was independent, that Billy Graham was bad for Christianity in America. I don't know anyone who is a Christian who disliked Billy Graham. I've never heard that before. Joel Osteen, you'll hear that all the time. Billy Graham, everyone loved Billy Graham. Anybody here dislike Billy Graham? I just want to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn. But I do think, regardless of whether the person's good for the faith or not, I do think accountability is good, order is good, and structure is good. What that does is it gives accountability. I appreciate accountability. That keeps me contained from making mistakes. And that's a little bit of what they're talking about. When you talk about ecclesiastical order, we belong to the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, one of the things that our polity, it's all man-made, by the way. Our polity is we believe in what we call congregationalism. So we believe that the power of the church belongs to the congregation, right? And so we have in our LCMS district presidents. We don't have bishops, for instance. If you go to the ELCA, for instance, has bishops. The Methodist Church has bishops. Episcopalian has bishops. The Catholic Church certainly has bishops and archbishops and all kinds of things like that. In the LCMS, we don't have anything like that. We have what we call district presidents. Within those district presidents, we have, I think, 32 districts. Within those district presidents, we have circuit visitors. I don't know how many circuits the Texas district has, but I have the privilege of being the circuit visitor for Circuit 3, which is our circuit here. And as a circuit visitor, then we have congregations, and then when we have convention, so districts will have convention every 3 years. Ours is coming up actually in about 3 weeks or 2 weeks. I'll be there. David sits on the board of directors for the district, and so the district president has accountability, and his accountability is supposed to be through the district board of directors. But when we go to vote at district, every congregation has a right of 2 votes. They all have a right of a lay vote. So we are sending a representative from Hope, and we have a pastoral vote. So we get to send myself or Pastor Dan to go and vote. And so every church gets that, no matter how big the church is or how small the church is. So we'll go and vote. When we go to synodical vote, that's also every 3 years, so that'll be next year. Every circuit has a lay vote and a pastoral vote. And so we'll send a representative from our circuit. So that would represent, for us, and I won't get too much into the weeds on this, that would represent going all the way to Midland. We'll send one or two people, one layperson. They cannot be from the same church. And so they make all the decisions on behalf of the church body, of the LCMS. I mean, that's how things are done. That's how we do it. Everybody's different. Our district president cannot come into Hope and say, you will worship according to this style. You will have a constitution that looks like this. You will do this. You can have this pastor, but not this pastor. They leave that up to the congregation. So who the congregation calls as a pastor is completely up to the congregation. Can Hope Lutheran Church call a pastor that is not an LCMS rostered pastor? Is this kind of a confusing thing? Actually, we would say, yeah, you can. Now, in doing so, you are asking to not be part of the LCMS anymore, but we believe that that is your right. You can do that. I wouldn't encourage it, but we can do that. So, but that's our polity. So the whole idea is ecclesiastical order teaches that no one should publicly teach in the church or administer the sacraments unless he is regularly called. And so the whole idea is this is all for order. So it's like, so what they're trying to say is, look, and so what Luther's trying to say in the Augsburg Confession is, look, the church has a structure, and that structure should be followed, right? A pastor should be called, right? When we say called or rightly called, who defines what rightly called is? Does God define that? No. Who defines it? The congregation does. So the LCMS is defined rightly called means that the seminary, or they had to go through some educational training, either through seminary or one of its appropriate programs, right? And the synod had to sign off that this person has completed its requirements and that this person is, and I have, I can't remember what it's called on my wall. It's a certificate of ordination. And then there's some other form that basically says this person is qualified and accredited, or whatever word you want to use, to be called by a congregation. And the congregation gets a list of these candidates and calls them. But it is all man-made, and it's the church who defines what this looks like. And then when do they define that? They define it at a convention. Can they change those rules? Absolutely. How do they change it? They'll go to convention, and the church body, through congregation lay people and pastors, will vote on it, and they'll change the rules. And they can do that, and they have changed the rules. Whenever there's new programs, we now have what's called an SMP program, and that's a new one since I've been a pastor. And so these are kind of unique programs that have come to fill needs and to, and so forth. So it does change in some ways, but still, all the same, the synod says this person is approved, and the synod has a criteria that is met in order for this person to be open for a call. It's all for good order. And what it says is that you don't want somebody all of a sudden stepping in and saying, I am pastor and I'm going to lead this church, and we're not going to call a pastor because I can do everything else. No, they say, no, we want to follow the criteria that the synod has set. And part of being in a synod is to say that we walk together. That's what the word synod means. We walk together for the purpose of common unity, structure, and order. And what the synod does is make sure that the pastors are theologically trained according to the doctrines that are set forth by our synod, and that they hold us accountable to the fact that we need to continue to stay in line with the rest of the synod and doctrine and beliefs and teachings. Simple enough, right? Boring enough, right? We ready to move on? Any questions to that?
Until you get into a situation where they're teaching differently from what the synod believes and they have to be removed, which I've known one pastor in that category back in Houston who was charismatic.
Yeah.
And they had to come in and say, you can't do that.
It's very difficult, and you may say all this stuff is boring and, let's move past it until it becomes an issue. And then you're glad that we have this order and structure. Because then when it becomes an issue, then we say, okay, now we need help. And we're glad we have it.
So, I may be off track, but how does the ECLA, how did they get so far different and still be able to say Lutheran?
Well, there's two ways I'd answer that. So how does the ELCA function so differently and still, use the same name? Well, they come from two organizations that come from the same starting point but head in different directions is the answer to that. And so carry the name from the starting point. But their polity, when they were formed, they formed a governance structure that's just very different than ours. I'm not saying that the LCMS's governance structure is right or biblical even. It's a man-made structure. But just because it's a man-made structure doesn't mean that it's bad or wrong. It's still a good thing. The first church, right, had to figure this out. And you go through Acts chapter 4 and 5, they struggle with this. In fact, they get their first complaints as people come up and say everybody's mad because the widows are not being fed and cared for, and they go, well, okay, so let us appoint some people to do that so we can do, and they organize themselves. The first church also did what? They gave everything to one common pool and then redistributed. And that was part of what happened is as they were redistributing, guess who was getting left out? The widows were. And so they said, this isn't right. This isn't good. And so then they had to change and move it and alter it, right? So that all for the sake of good order. At no point did Jesus sit down and say, okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to have a synodical president, and then he's going to have district presidents, and then you're going to organize yourself this way. We just didn't have that, but good order is still good order. So the LCMS has kind of had this form that started all the way back in 1839 with C.F.W. Alter, and the LCA, which kind of started in 1978. They created their own polity. And then, every church body has, the Methodist Church has its own unique polity. The Methodist Church, the pastors, they will pick you up and move you, right? So if you're there 3 years, 4 years, they'll say, you've had your time, you're moving somewhere else. And they have complete control over that. And I know there's some nuances to how they do that. In the LCMS, I am often asked this. I'm always surprised at how often I'm asked this. When they say, so how long are you allowed to stay here in Lubbock? And I always think that always catches me off guard because I just grew up in this world and I know it. But I'm like, as long as I want to be here and as long as the church wants me to be here, I'm allowed to be here, right? So at no point will the church body come in and say, you need to go somewhere else. Even if they come and say, Eric, I really think you need to go somewhere else, I can just simply say, no. Because the way we look at it is God has called me here, and he has called me here through the voice of the congregation. And that so y'all's voice, we would say, is is the right call and the right entity that would extend that call. It's not that, and again, so different structures doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. They're just different. So any other questions? Good question. I mean, it's hard to navigate how everyone functions differently, and you say, well, how did we get here, or how did we get there? Well, they function very differently.
It's interesting, and I didn't realize this, and it's nothing to chase a rabbit hole, down into a rabbit hole, but it is interesting that I think is worth noting is the government, U.S. government, recognizes who stands as a pastor according to how that church body
Yes, they do.
recognizes them.
It is their own tax bracket. So the clergy have their own tax world.
And the way I learned that is
And it's based on the church body's definition of how they understand the ordination of clergy.
there was a parsonage that was being used by a member of the church who was basically an elder functioning in the role of leading on Sundays and things like that. And the IRS said, you've got to pay the local property clerk. Whoever came in and defined that, and I said, why would you do that? Because there's Church of Christ who wake up one day and say, I'm called and I'm a pastor now. And they said they go according to your church
Because the
bodies.
Church of Christ would recognize that person as called and as a pastor. The LCMS would not.
Right.
And so it's all according to how your church body that you affiliate with recognizes.
I just never thought that the government would follow the rules of that body. It was just
Yeah.
interesting to me. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I remember some pastors in Mexico, they stay for years and years in the same church, and they become the authority, the total.
Yeah. So here's the reality. Is our system perfect? No. It's got problems. Okay. I like it personally, but it's the one I know. But I can sit here and if we wanted to grab a beer and talk, I could tell you all the things I think of that have problems within it. And we don't have to drink beer. I'm just so. But it's not perfect. It really isn't. But it's a. I'm not sure there's one that I would say is perfect. So my response to that is, well, then go find me the structure that you think is better and tell me why it's better.
Yeah, because that pastor didn't allow the young people to come to his church. He chose who would come.
So part of the thing, one of the things I would say is difficult in our structure is if it's real difficult. What if the congregation is real split? Some of them like the pastor and some don't.
That's right.
That could be a problem.
The elderly people like him.
Mm-hmm. So it requires, I will say this, it requires a congregation that learns how to have difficult conversations, how to work through things, how to get along together, and how to navigate together. So, there's something real biblical about that. Did you have another question? Okay. Okay, if you think of it, just holler it out. So Article 15, concerning ecclesiastical usages or concerning church regulations, you may have it called. I don't know what y'all's title is.
Just church rights.
Yeah, concerning church rights. So here's kind of well, let's read it. Of usages in the church, they teach that those ought to be observed, they being the Lutherans, which may be observed without sin, and which are profitable unto tranquility and good order in the church, as particular holy days, festivals, and the like. So what does all that mean? Right? So what that means is, right, we have in our church body, we follow the church calendar. Easter comes at the appropriate time. Christmas comes at the appropriate time. What did we celebrate just last Sunday? Pentecost. Because it was the day of Pentecost. We said, what if we decided for whatever right reason that we don't want to celebrate these things anymore? Is that sinful? I'm going to be careful with my wording here. Is that sinful? You may think it's wrong, but that's not my question. It's not sinful. No. Now you may say, okay, it's not sinful, but I still think it's wrong. Okay, I can have a conversation with that. But it's not sinful. If we're a church that has never had these things and we add them to them, right? Let's say we've never celebrated these things accordingly, and all of a sudden we say, you know what, we need to celebrate these things. Is this wrong? Say we need to celebrate these things because if we don't celebrate them, then we're not the church. That's wrong.
Yeah, because there will be some people that will not be in agreement, and so it's going to create some problems too.
Yeah, so here's the idea. We can observe them. They may be observed without sin, right? So the practice of observing them is not sinful. The practice of not observing them is not sinful. We observe them because they're profitable unto tranquility, for peace. They're profitable for good order. Is it good to have good order? Yeah, it's good to have Pentecost come, and it's good that all the Lutheran churches in the world are celebrating Pentecost at the same time. And not just the Lutheran church, by the way.
So what were they addressing when they were making this statement? Was the Catholic Church saying you can't be a church in
Okay.
good standing if you...
Well, let me get to that.
Okay.
Yep. So, nevertheless, concerning such things, men are admonished that consciences are not to be burdened. So this is the key. It's good to celebrate them, but do not burden the conscience. And I'm going to use the word conscience a lot today. Do not burden the conscience. The church should not burden the conscience of the believers if they don't.
So like if you missed church on Easter in the Catholics, that was a big...
That's a bit. If you miss church on Easter, you have Hail Marys for a life, right? Yeah. Or what if you are? Well, let's say we as a church decide we're not going to celebrate Easter, right? We're going to do something else. I'm not saying we're not proclaiming Jesus. I'm not saying we're not celebrating a resurrection. We're just not going to honor that festival. Should our conscience be burdened?
They shouldn't, but I think that we like the ritual of doing it, and so maybe we'd be unhappy. I would be
I agree. We would be unhappy. We would be missing something. It would not be profitable to our tranquility, right? So I'm not saying that we should do, but should we burden our conscience as though such observances were necessary to salvation? Should we burden ourselves, walk out of the room saying, we didn't celebrate Easter, I am going to hell therefore? No. Right. There's no salvation to be earned through the observances of traditions and festivals and so forth. You cannot. So, we have a phrase, what's the Latin? That's going to drive me crazy now. The phrase is a work having been worked, is the translation of the Latin that I can't remember. But it's a work having been worked, okay? And the whole point of the concept of a work having been worked is, okay, so if I go to this Mass, the fact that I went to the Mass earns me credit towards salvation, right? So what was done in it, it could have all been in Latin. I didn't know anything that was going on, but I was there. The work was performed. Does that make sense? So because the work was performed, therefore it is good towards my salvation. That's kind of the teaching that was very much part of it. So what did Luther do? Luther made a pilgrimage to Rome, climbed up the steps, right? Put a coin in the thing and heard it clang, right? Did all the things, visited all the relics. He did all these traditions, went through all these rituals. And in every effort of trying to do that, he thought, if I just do this one more, I'll earn salvation. Then he still didn't feel any peace with that. So he did more, and no peace, more, no peace. And finally he says, I cannot find peace in all of this. Where did he finally find peace? In Jesus. He finally found peace in Jesus. And when he finally found peace in Jesus, he says, is there anything that I need more or beyond Jesus? No, there's no ritual, there's no tradition, there's no rite, there's no anything that is necessary for salvation. Now, that doesn't mean, so therefore, we'll throw it all out. No, some of them are good. They give peace. They teach, right? They point people. They give guidance, right? They're good for tranquility. So there's a lot of benefits in traditions. There's a lot of benefits in the things we do. But as soon as we start to say as a church that we have to do this, and if we don't do this, there's a big problem. Well, hold on. Let's be careful. Let's make sure we argue why we do the things we do in the right context. Sometimes we argue doing the things we do, why? Where do we normally go to? And I don't want to give up too much of what I want to talk about Sunday. But where do we normally go to? I want to sing these songs and not these songs. I want service to look this way and not this way. Why do we do that? Tradition, but why? Why these traditions? Comfort. It all comes down to what? It's because that's what I want. Right? It all settles back down in here. Right? And the whole idea is, okay, that's fine. We all understand that we have our personal preferences in these things. And it's not that there's anything wrong with having personal preferences. But we just need to be careful that we don't burden other people's conscience by our personal preference. And this happens. By the way, pastors are terrible at this. You would all go to convention and somebody will tell me because we have a praise band that we're not truly Lutheran. And I'll go, oh, let's sit down and let's talk. Do you know, Mr. Truly Lutheran, what Luther says about burdening the conscience in the Augsburg Confession?
So if you're
that doesn't happen much anymore. But
working to resolve one of these issues, where is it good to point people to? And I have an answer, but I was just going to see if I could get you to not say what I would say, but if you got two people and they're having these differences, what is it that you point them to kind of lift the dialogue?
So a couple things that I would point them to. And maybe, let me not pick on praise band. Let me pick on the fact that we don't wear our albs and stoles every Sunday. Let's pick on that. I would point them to two things. There's two verses that I always go to. One is the entire book of Galatians. You read the entire book of Galatians, and what does it talk about? If you put anything instead of faith, you put any work, or any law, anything like that, then your faith is futile. The other part, I love going to 2 Corinthians 5, where it says, let's look it up. We therefore no longer regard Christ in this way. Some of this will give a little precursor to Sunday. So 2 Corinthians 5, we start in verse 11.
Oh, we start 15. I have a 15. I have a whole crossing here from 15 to
Let's start 16, yeah.
21.
Yep, 16 to 21. There we go.
Yeah.
16 to 20. Let's go to 16. Let's start there. So from now on, therefore, we regard no one according to the flesh, meaning because we are all born again of the Spirit, we no longer can look at each other and go, oh, you're just of the world. No, you're not of the world anymore. 966. Even though we once regarded Christ according to the flesh, we regard him thus no longer. So therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's what? You're a new creation. Yeah. You're a new creation. The old is gone, and behold, the new has come. That is a reality for you. You are a new creation. Not you will be a new creation. You are a new creation when? Right now, right? At the beginning of your baptism, right now, still, that is true for you. So verse 18, all this, and by the way, so what do we call that? That you're a new creation. What is that? What's another word for that? I'm asking you to read my mind. You won't do that. Transformed, okay? The old is gone. So what you called yourself before, or what you knew of yourself as before, is no longer, and you now have a new life, self, identity is the word I was looking for, yeah.
Not slave anymore.
You're not a slave anymore. You're now free. That's Paul in Galatians, right?
Yes.
You're not a slave anymore. You're now free. You have a new identity. The old identity is gone. I've given you a whole new identity. Think of Jacob when he wrestles with God and as he's crossing the Jabbok River, right? And he says, your name is no longer Jacob. I will now call you Israel. He gave him a whole new name, right? When we baptize a child, by the way, this is something we don't have in our baptismal right here at Hope, and I want to put it back in because this is like the third time in the last 2 weeks that it's come up in my mind. When we baptize a child, the old rite used to say, you turn to the parents, mom and dad, and you would say, how is this child to be named? The whole point of that is why? Because here they're getting a whole new life, whole new identity. And they'd say, Eric Daniel Heiner. And they okay. And Eric Daniel Heiner, I baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So the old is gone, the new is come. So it's all about identity. And identity is important when we talk about this, because when we understand our identity in Christ, that takes always precedence over our preferences. Does that make sense? So before we talk about what I want, what we need to first talk about is what? What does Christ want for me? So that's the first thing. The next thing is what? So we keep going. So all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and did what? Gave us what? The ministry of reconciliation. So that is, in Christ God was reconciled the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. And what did he entrust to us? The message of reconciliation. Therefore we are what? So now this is not just identity of saying who we are. We are ambassadors, but it's an identity with a purpose. So it's identity with a purpose, and it's now identity with a mission. And if we understand our identity and who we are with Christ, we understand our purpose and what we're called to do with Christ, and our mission as we're called to what we're supposed to do in Christ, where does personal preferences fit in all of that? It really doesn't. There's really not much of a place for it. Okay, now, all that being said is, I'm not saying traditions are bad. I'm not saying any of those things. It says right there in our Book of Concord, traditions are good, right? They need their proper place. They need to live in their proper place. Why are they good? For good order, right? They're good for good order, and they're good for to ease the conscience, as it says, or to give peace. I'm not saying it right.
I think something that you said,
Profitable to tranquility was what I was trying to say. Yeah.
but if I think especially done by the called servant, they're good for teaching.
They're good for teaching. all the holy days, do we practice all the holy days?
Yeah.
We do not. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Remember things.
Yeah. How many of us came to church on Ascension Sunday? Let's be honest. If we held church service on Ascension Sunday, how many would be here? Maybe Lee. Okay. So probably not many of us. I held an Ascension Sunday service, right? Or not even Ascension Sunday. I'm talking about Ascension Day was like on a Wednesday. Okay, so I've held an Ascension, or like a Thursday, right? I've held an Ascension Day service before in Fort Worth, and I think like 5 people came. Okay, I was like, well, it's better than nothing, right? So, it's just the number of festivals that are in our church calendar is really astonishing. There's a bunch of them. Right? And we really don't celebrate even half of them. What do we celebrate? We celebrate the big ones, right? So that was even, Dan even mentioned this in his sermon Sunday. You can talk about, we don't usually celebrate Pentecost a whole lot. We don't talk about it a whole lot. We're not real sure always what to do with it. We all know what to do with Christmas. We all know what to do with Easter. We do a pretty good job in the Lutheran Church of holding on to Advent and celebrating that, right? What's the next one that's coming up? Well, we have Pentecost for a long time, but there's a lot of minor festivals in the season of Pentecost. We won't change the banners probably for any of them. Why? Because it's just hard, right? The world's a lot different. Now we really could. I'm not sure I know of a church in our country that still changes the banners for every single one. We change them every week. And boy, it's just a lot of teaching, a lot of talking. There's a festival for the St. Peter, and then there's one for St. John, and there's one for there's St. Nicholas, and there's so many of them.
If you follow Alan Eckert on Facebook down at Trinity in San Angelo, he posts every day that there's a festival.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I've never heard of that saint.
Y'all would go to church 3 times a week to do it. And maybe we should. I don't know. Some of it gets lost. So we kind of hit the majors, right? There are such a thing as major festivals and minor festivals. And we make sure that we always note the major. Whenever you see the colors change, we will talk about it. We'll explain why they change. And those are all the major festivals. But boy, they change a lot if you really want to keep up with it.
I think it'd be fun. I'm going to tell everybody this, but last Sunday, what's the Lewis daughter that did the acolyting in the first service?
Mackenzie.
We should get a child up there to ask a pastor on a Sunday about why we're changing colors, because she was back there with Dan. And she was asking, why did we change from this to red? Mm-hmm. And so Dan was trying to answer, and she said, why don't we use orange? Why don't we use yellow? She started tossing out these colors we don't use, and Dan was trying to say, well, I've always, it was just funny to listen to because I think it would be eye-opening.
Dan he's always a proposition for orange sometime during the Pentecost season, because all this needs to be green for Sunday. And he always petitions that we need an orange service. And then I was telling Dan, I really think I read somewhere that they're talking about doing that. And again, it's just the LCMS talking about doing this. Now, the unique thing is that what the LCMS does is not unique to the historic Christian church. The Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church, the Catholic Church, even the Methodist Church, we do a lot of research when we do sermons. We look up a lot of things, and every Christian denomination, at the core of that denomination, not in every Christian church, but every Christian denomination at the core of that denomination, follows the same liturgical calendar about a 95%. Now, there's about a 5% variance that you would find. And about 95% of it is the same. So the churches that follow their historical traditional roots, you can go and they'll have the same readings. They'll have the same liturgical colors on every Sunday with about a 5% variant. So it's kind of, I think that's neat, and I think that's good to know. One of the things that we talk about why we do this in the LCMS is it takes the preacher's personal preferences out of it. So otherwise, you would just hear a sermon about what I want to talk about every Sunday. So it forces me to teach things and read readings, and so sometimes you read a reading and you're like, oh, I better talk about that. That's a tough one. Whereas I would never put that reading out in front of y'all unless, just kind of life pushes me to do it.
That's one thing that I like about this church is, the Lutheran,
Mm-hmm.
do that. Because I have gone to other churches where the pastor preached whatever he wanted in it was
Yeah.
disjointed.
Now, is our conscience bound to this? No, we do it for good order.
Yeah.
You'll know this if you've been at Hope. You'll know that there's times Dan and I, we sit down and we says, you know what, we really need a sermon series to talk about X, Y, or Z. And so we'll take a 4 or 6 or however long hiatus from our what we call our lectionary, and we'll talk about something a little more specific. So we do that. You especially see that around Christmas and Easter, Lent and Advent time frame for sure. We'll probably do it this summer at some point. We're fixing to take, there's my Texan, we're fixing to take a whole year for a sermon series as we go through the story next year, which I'm looking forward to a lot. Now, is that okay? Am I burdening y'all or burdening myself or burdening our church? You shouldn't be burdened. And if you are, let me know, and I want to sit down and talk with y'all, right? What's that?
So it depends on how good the series is.
Well, I might be burdening you in other ways, but I'm not burdening your conscience. So they are admonished also that human traditions instituted to propitiate God, to merit grace, and to make satisfaction for sins. There's no satisfaction in sins in any rite or ritual. It's one of the problems that our LCMS has had with the rite of confirmation. The rite of confirmation is not a sacrament. Your child will not be saved because he went through a rite of confirmation. And so parents push and push and push and push and push. We just got to get them to that rite of confirmation. And they go to the rite of confirmation and they go through that whole ceremony. What's important in the confirmation process is the catechesis, the teaching that happens in it, not the rite. That's why we have changed how we do confirmation here. Because there's too much emphasis on the rite of confirmation and not enough on the what? The teaching that happens in the process. The process is more important than the rite. So teach. That's what's important. Now, is confirmation important? Yeah, it's great. I love the rite of confirmation. I was never so proud as a dad than when I got to see my daughter get confirmed. Right? That made me just so, yeah, it was awesome. Now, but I know that doesn't guarantee her salvation. That doesn't earn her any merit towards her salvation. It just means that she has gone through a process of learning, right? And I know it's not going to stop there. It's got to keep going. So vows, traditions concerning meats and days, etc., instituted to merit grace, to make satisfactions for sins, are useless and they're contrary to the gospel. So any of those things that are taught as you must do these things in order to be saved, no, you must not do these things. In fact, don't do them. As soon as somebody says you must do this to be saved, you have a moral obligation to not do it. I'm going to say something that is kind of petty, okay, but it's true, okay. Why do Lutherans sprinkle?
Because there was not enough water.
There's not enough water because Germany was in a drought. I don't know, but why?
It's almost just to be in response to the people who think you have to be fully immersed.
That's exactly why. The reason we sprinkle and do not fully immerse is because people said you cannot be saved unless you fully immerse. And we said, watch this. Yeah. So, and that's why. No, it really is. It is a much greater symbolism for us to go and dive into a pool. It fits our understanding of baptism better, I believe. But as soon as somebody says, you have to do this in order to earn salvation, now we have an obligation to say, therefore, I cannot give credit to your false teaching, credence to your false teaching by following it.
So is that what Catholics also sprinkle?
No, Catholics sprinkle because they always have. I don't know. I can't answer for them. But when the Reformation happened, you know, there's a history to this. When the Reformation happened, a lot of Lutherans started to dunk because it's a better symbolism. It's neat. There's something really spectacular about it, and it fits our understanding of baptism, just being immersed, right, engulfed in God's grace and God's love. And then the Anabaptists came and said to all the other ones, you are not saved because you were not immersed. And then all of a sudden the Lutherans go, oh, we can't immerse anymore, because then in doing so we would be giving the message to the Anabaptists that says, you're right.
No, I didn't know that.
So isn't that something? Now, I know some Lutheran churches now that immerse, but there's not a bunch of Anabaptists knocking on their doors saying they're not saved. So it's not, that message is no longer communicated. So sometimes we hold on to things from 500 years ago that are no longer a an issue. So if somebody came to me and says, Pastor, can I be immersed? I would say, yes. First, I might ask, is there anybody saying you can't be saved unless you're immersed? If they said, no. Okay, then let's do it. If somebody says, yeah, my friend said, unless I'm immersed, can't go to heaven. And I say, well, then we're not going to immerse. We're going to sprinkle. Right? And we're going to teach while we do it. We're going to teach. Right?
So let me ask this question. If you had a younger person who just came to the church and had not been baptized before
Mhm.
and wants to be baptized, and he said, well, I would like to go to one of the lakes to be baptized.
We go to Alan Henry, yeah.
Will you do that?
So my first question would be, say, why? And it depends on what their answer is. So, and that would give me a cue as to how much teaching do we need to do yet. So, and if I said why, they say, well, because that's how Jesus was baptized. Okay, so why is it important for you to be baptized like Jesus was? I just think it'd be cool. Okay, we're okay with that. Well, I just think that we have to. No, now we have a problem. We don't have to. If you have to, then we need to go to the Jordan River and find the exact spot, and we need to be baptized there. Or if they say, well, I talked to my friend, they said if I was baptized in any other fashion, if I wasn't immersed, then I couldn't go to heaven, I would say. Or that it's not a valid baptism. Then I would say, okay, we need a lot of teaching. And then after you learn all this teaching, then you need to decide either A, you need to go have a conversation with your friend and say, I am doing this because of the symbolism and the neatness of it. I am not doing this because of any requirement. Or don't do it at all and let's go get sprinkled, right? I mean, get baptized, not that, but in a different manner. So this is where sometimes we make confession by what we do, and sometimes that's hard. Now, somebody may say these things are petty. Well, it's petty until someone burdens your conscience with a tradition that your conscience should not be burdened after. So it may sound petty until somebody says you're not. And I've had people tell me this. I've had people say, you and your congregation are not going to heaven because you have not baptized them right. I have literally had people say that. It was in Denton. I haven't had it in Lubbock, but in Denton, actually, I had someone leave a note on our door. I could tell you weird stories about this person, but anyways. But still, to think that never happens, it does. It really does. It's maybe not common, but it does. So it's that last part, right? To impose an unnecessary burden on someone is useless, and not just useless, but it's contrary to the gospel. Okay. All right. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, even in the Bible, what is it? I forget, in one of the books, it says that when God says that He's tired of these ritual things. I can't quote the Bible.
When he's tired of it. What do you?
When people came, this was before Jesus, when they came to give honors to God, that it was in ritual type of stuff.
Right. When they.
He didn't care for that kind of stuff. Even for prayer.
Yes.
Too much words flourish.
Yes. Yes. So it goes back to that work having been worked.
Yes.
Why do you pray? Well, I say words that I have to say because when I say these words, they sound great, but what do they mean? I have no idea. Well, we're missing something.
Yeah.
There's more to faith than just going through the motions. And just because you go through the motions doesn't mean that you're now saved. It doesn't give any comfort. Now, I can argue that sometimes we need to just go through the motion and create devotion and obedience. Now, those are different things, but that's a different conversation, okay? None of those things will create salvation, and none of those things will earn any merit towards salvation. The only way to salvation is through whom? It's through Jesus Christ. So if any time the church ever puts any burden on someone outside of the gift that Jesus gives and the means by which he gives his gifts, that would be baptism and the Lord's Supper, we would say we're burdening the conscience. And then you can go read all of Paul, and he talks about that in Galatians especially.
I read it 2 times.
Good.
So,
Yeah. So what do we do with human traditions? We keep them. We keep them, and we teach. The answer is always in teaching. We teach. So are they important? The answer is yes. Traditions are very important. So I don't ever want anyone to think that I'm saying traditions are not. They need their proper place, though. Where's their place? In teaching, in keeping good order, right? Telling the story, right? All those things. What ways do we confuse this article still today? What do y'all think? Do we still confuse this article? How do we?
I think it's our sinful nature to continue to confuse it all the way into the end of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we, and I'm not saying we as Hope, but as the church in general, do we put unnecessary burdens on people who are joining our church or visiting our church? I hope not, but the reality is we probably do. We probably do. You know,
I've not heard it
maybe
this way,
unintentionally.
but I think people are intimidated by our faith because it's a lot of times seen as overthinking.
Because it's structured and
Well, and
or
just
it's-
the level of thought that goes
Mhm.
into what constitutes a sacrament,
Yeah.
and what constitutes, faith,
And Lutherans tend to be very brainy, which sometimes works against us because we're not very feely, right? And having feelings is not a bad thing.
maybe we put too much emphasis on doctrine.
well, that's.
Oh, you could
that's what I
never.
was trying to
Yeah.
say is
Yeah.
I think people,
Yeah.
think we do.
I don't think we do, but I'm Lutheran. But I could see how we could be accused of that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we would say, no, you have to have your doctrines in order, and you have to have it all lined up.
But it's so much less than the Catholics.
True. I've never been anything but Lutheran, so we'll ask Gabby. Is that true? It's so much less than the cat. Yeah. There's the goal, the heart and center of our church body is always point people to Jesus. Point people to Jesus. Point people to Jesus. We love teaching. Teach. But all of our teaching should do what? Always go back to and flow from Jesus. He is the center. We would say Jesus Christ crucified is the center of biblical teaching. All right, I want to get to the fun conversations. You ready? Let me read this. This is from the Apology. Regarding this issue, there is no difference between our traditions and Mosaic ceremonies. Paul indeed condemns the Mosaic ceremonies, probably circumcision, Mosaic ceremonies, just as he condemns traditions for this reason, that they were considered to be works that merit righteousness before God. In this way, they obscure the work of Christ and the righteousness of faith, right? And Paul says in Galatians, if you are saved through circumcision, then Christ died for no reason at all, and your faith is futile. The Holy Fathers, I like this last part too, also from the Apology. The Holy Fathers did not institute a single tradition for the purpose of meriting the forgiveness of sins or righteousness. They instituted them for the sake of good order in the church and for the sake of tranquility. I like that word, tranquility. To give peace, right? We should find in your church, you should find a certain level of comfortability and recognition and so forth. That's okay. Routine. I once asked somebody, I was like, boy, should we switch up service? Are we in too much of a routine? They said, no, I like the routine. I like knowing that I come to church, then I can know what to expect, and it happens as I expect it. And now we switch it up when unique things. We're going to switch it up this Sunday, by the way. We're going to have a unique service this Sunday. Why? Because it's Holy Trinity Sunday, of course, right? This first Sunday after Pentecost is Holy Trinity Sunday, one of those minor festivals that we are going to celebrate. So, and are you ready? We are going to read the Athanasian Creed this Sunday. If you are not excited, then I don't know what can get you excited.
Cindy,
The sermon better be shorter. I said we better make it shorter this time.
Cindy and I are going somewhere.
I shouldn't have. We'll post this after Sunday. Article 16. Let's have some fun. Let's talk politics. How about concerning civil affairs? So that's kind of the church affairs, right? What about the government? How do we, as Christians, interact with the government? Are y'all ready for some fighting and debating and some good arguments? This is going to be great. Of civil affairs, they teach that lawful civil ordinances are what? Good works from where? Oh, so the speed limit is from God?
The government that institutes the speed limit is.
All lawful civil ordinances are good works of God. So the speed limit that you drive down, that is a work of God. Oh, how many of y'all have ever thought of it that way? That makes sinning a whole new thing, right? It's like, that takes it to a whole new level. Yeah. Okay, so should Christians be involved in civil affairs? How many of y'all get uncomfortable when you have a city council member who's a pastor? I'll be honest, it makes me uncomfortable. I don't know why, but it should not make me uncomfortable. So the next line, and that it is right for Christians to bear civil office. Is it okay for a Christian to be a police officer? Absolutely. Absolutely.
The Lutheran pastor that was the Houston area vice president until this most recent East Field.
From Houston? You're not thinking of
Frank Horbrosh?
Oh, Ralph Holbrosh.
Ralph.
Yeah.
You sat on the school board down there.
Yeah. Pastors sitting on school boards, or even elders or church members. It doesn't even have to be pastors. Things like, in fact, I would say that it's good for Christians to get involved. In fact, I would say this, that Christians need to get more involved in civil affairs. We need to, I would encourage any one of our church members, go serve on city council, go serve on school boards, go serve on all these functions, right? The civil matters. School boards is a great one for people to serve at. Or to sit as judges, right? Is it a bad thing to have Christian judges? No, not at all. To judge matters by the imperial, right? To judge, what does that mean? To judge according to the laws that we have in place, right? So what if those, and other existing laws, to award just punishments, to engage in just wars. How many Christians are burdened because they can't fight? I'm trying to think of that movie that came out. The guy wouldn't pick up a gun, but it wasn't because of his Christian faith that he wouldn't, but it was something else. It doesn't matter. I'm off. But anyways, to serve as soldiers, right? So is it okay for a Christian to serve as a soldier and take a life? Man, this gets into real difficult challenges, but the answer is, in a very simple way, yeah, it is. It's okay. Is it good? It's a different question. Okay, it's never good when someone dies. It's a reality that our world is, again, broken. But it's okay in the sense that a Christian goes and becomes a soldier. To make legal contracts, to hold property, to make oath when required by the magistrates, to marry a wife, and to be given in marriage. This is fascinating to me. Where did Luther put the institution of marriage? He called it a civil affair. Isn't that kind of interesting? Who defines what marriage is in our country? The government does. When I got married, what is it that I had to do? Here's the reality. If I went through the whole ceremony, went through the whole rite, and never once went to the court office and got a marriage license and paid my whatever $80 for it, right? Then guess what? The state, do they call you married? And if you are not called married by the state, but you're living as you're married, maybe the church recognizes that marriage, but according to the state, you're living as a lie, right? Or a single couple.
They don't have rights either under the law.
And you won't get your tax bracket. But you go, oh, but the church recognizes me as married, and the state would go, doesn't matter, we do not.
I understand in some states, and maybe in Texas too, that law that the Spaniards had that couple becomes automatically married even though they never.
Yep, according to the state. And so I often will tell,
Exactly, it's 1 year or an introduction or a child.
yeah, there's
Depends on the state.
every state is different. I do know that's true. And this sometimes comes up in pastoral counseling when a couple comes and they've been living together for 10 years. And I say, well, how does the state recognize you? Well, they recognize us as married. And I say, then you are married. And we can perform a ceremony that recognizes that marriage, honors that marriage, and, brings it before God with vows and so forth. But the reality is you are. The state has claimed it. Now let's put the church's scope on it. It's a.
But was Luther the first one in Europe that gave the inheritance to his wife? That prior to that, there was no such thing, recognition of the woman as having property.
It is amazing how much Luther shaped the world.
Yeah.
James Madison said Luther was the forerunner of the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution. So there's what Luther did was really revolutionary. There's a number of things I want to dive into this some more. Let's finish. The gospel, they condemn the Anabaptists who forbid civil offices, so the pacifists, Quakers, Mennonites, those who refuse those things. Those are all Anabaptists. They condemn also those who do not place evangelical perfection in the fear of God and in faith, but in forsaking civil officers. So we find our perfection in the disobedience and things like that. The gospel teaches an internal righteousness that comes from the heart. Meanwhile, so again, through your civil disobedience or even your righteous disobedience, you're not going to merit salvation. Meanwhile, it does not destroy the state or the family, but very much requires that they be preserved as ordinances of God. Right? So, do we want a good government? Yes. In Luther's explanation to the Lord's Prayer, when we say, "Give us this day our daily bread," and he includes in that good government as part of our daily bread. Right? Good reputation he also includes in there, but good government is part of it. So we want a good state. We don't want to destroy the state. So we are not anarchists. So be careful, when we start forming our political minds, right? I tend to slip in, all government is evil, blah. Like, no, all government is not evil. I cannot say that. It was instituted by God. God created that government. God wants that government to do good. He wants it to be righteous. He wants it to do good for its citizens. And I do too, right? And so when I go to the voting booth, I need to vote for how? Most of us vote how? What's gonna profit me, right? What's gonna put money in my bank? What's gonna make my life easier? That's how we vote. What we need to vote is what's gonna give the most justice to the world around us. Everybody following me? We need to vote thinking about who? Not ourselves, but our neighbors. What does it mean as I vote? Which candidate is going to help me love my neighbor the best? Which is going to profit my neighbor, my community? Not in the sense of financial profit, but profit them in righteousness, justice, and according to the will of God. Okay? Now that doesn't mean the government needs to go and start proclaiming Jesus in all things. That's not what I'm saying. But does God desire for there to be no poor? Yes, he does. Does God desire justice, that one will not lord over another one? Yes, he does. Does God desire that people are free and are able to live a life that is good and profitable for themselves as they choose? I believe he does. Right? Does God desire clean streets and water and healthy food and good things for them? Yes, he does. I mean, all these things God desires. So one way to look at it is you say, well, as you look at the world, what would God want for this community, for our country? And you say, well, God would want this. Well, then that's how you should vote. And I really mean it. And Now, am I saying vote for the Christian candidate? No, that's not at all what I'm saying. You can find a good pagan who can do these things. Can you not? Yes. And you can find a good Christian who is terrible at these things. And I would vote for the good pagan who's good at these things before I'd vote for the good Christian who's bad at these things. Everybody follow what I'm saying? So it's not a matter of, we are very different as Lutherans than the evangelicals. The evangelicals would say what? You go vote for the Christian regardless. And I would say, that's not true. I'm going to vote for the one who I think will profit our country the best in terms of righteousness, justice, and the will of God. And so that's what I look for. So you just ask yourself the question, okay, in this policy, I've been in so many debates about this. Two people can get to two different conclusions, but think about it in the right way. Two people can get to the same conclusion and think about it completely wrongly. I got in a debate about somebody with the wall. Let's talk about the wall. Okay? I told you we're going to have fun today.
Fair to say another pastor.
It is fair to say. We'll stop there. But anyways. So we got in this debate about the wall. And the comment was made, if you truly love your neighbor, you have to take down the wall. And I said, okay, I'm not saying I disagree or agree about the wall. So I'm not going to give my hand, okay? I said, you got to be careful what you say there. Because who's also my neighbor? Well, okay, everyone I live with here already is my neighbor. Who else is my neighbor? Oh, the ones trying to get in, they're my neighbor. Let's keep identifying. Who is my neighbor? Yeah, the people who own land on the border, who are going through real troubles, they're our neighbor. The taxpayer that's here is my neighbor. Who else is my neighbor?
I would argue the future. I mean, my great-grandchildren yet to be born.
Your grandchildren yet to be born, they're my neighbor. Who else is my neighbor? The communities that are losing their citizens in the southern, in Mexico or whatnot, there's communities that are being decimated because all their willing and able people are leaving. They're my neighbor. Are the migrants our neighbor? Absolutely. Is there a singular answer that will serve all these neighbors? So should we burden the conscience and say, therefore, this answer is right and this one is wrong? No. So here's what I would say. Here's whether you're right or wrong as you navigate through this. If you answer the question because you say, I don't want those people in our country, I would say, you're not thinking of your neighbor. Does that make sense? If you answer that question, you say, we're going to take the wall down because we need to welcome everyone in our country regardless, I would say, you are also not thinking of your neighbor. If you answer that question, you say, I think we need to build the wall so we can protect the people in their communities and also in our communities and the communities surrounding them. That's okay, you're thinking of your neighbor. If you say we're going to take down the wall, we need to take down the wall so we can protect those who are so vulnerable as they're coming here looking for a better life, trying to support their family and kids, I'd say you are thinking of your neighbor. Do you see what I'm saying? You can get to one answer in the wrong way, and you can get to that same answer in the right way. And I would much rather stand next to the person who I disagree with, but we also are seeking the same thing of how to serve our neighbor than I would the person I have political alignment with, and he gets there in a way that I don't agree with. So we just got to be real careful how we talk about these things and who we align ourselves with. I think it starts when we start to think in these terms, we start to align ourselves maybe a little bit differently than just a red and blue line. And I think that's a good thing.
So in this, we look at the law as something that's been handed down through the civil government. So I may not like it, but we're going to follow that law because it's the law that's been handed down. When do you get to exercise civil disobedience?
So that's a great question. Let me get to that because you said something else. Here's where things get challenging. Let me go back to the wall. Here's where things get challenging. we get into a place where we have laws and we are called by God to obey those laws. And then it gets real challenging when our own government doesn't obey the laws. So there's two. Here would be, I'm going to give my political hand now. Okay. I think our government needs to do one of two things: change the law or fulfill the law. But don't keep the law and disregard the law. That upsets me. So either change it if you don't like it, or follow it and obey it. But quit living in this dual world.
Well, about the wall, I'm gonna just say what is in my mind about the wall and believe it or not. I think there's a broken system
It
of
is.
immigration.
Mhm.
In the United States, government has not been able to fix that because, for one thing, I suspect strongly that they want that cheap labor.
Yeah, I mean, that may be true. And then, yeah, so there's so many facets and ways to look at it. And that's what, it's just not such an easy thing to look at. And we need to, as Christians, make sure that we understand, are we asking the question, where's justice, where's righteousness, where's the will of God? So when is civil disobedience? I'm gonna pick on another topic now. The wall, by the way, you can apply that same logic to healthcare, there's so many things, right? All the issues. Civil disobedience. When the government calls on you to actively sin, right? Now this gets real difficult. Okay? It just does. This is not easy. There's one issue that is, I think, is black and white as you can get on this. Anybody know what I'm going to go to? Abortion. Yeah, it's simple. What does the law say? The law actually says it's legal, that someone has a right to take a child's life if they do not want to carry that child. And we would say, not true, that no one has a right to take that child's life. And so what we do is we practice civil disobedience, we protest, we march. The Lutherans for Life has a huge march on Washington, D.C. every year in regards to this. We try very much also to understand, we don't take the side as radical pro-lifers when they start really hating and shaming and so forth. We always want everyone to know the gospel as well. The gospel is our first priority of the church always. So we want to always share the gospel but we also want to stand up for those who have no voice. So we always take the side from the perspective of what is the right of the child and where is the child's voice in this? Well, an unborn child, we would say, their rights should be upheld every bit as much as our rights. And their voice should be heard every bit as much as our voice. You say, well, how can their voice be heard? They're not born yet. Well, that's where the church needs to step in and be a voice for the unborn. And so the question is, if you could go inside, no matter what the situation is, okay, the only exception that our church makes, and I think every Christian church body, is if the life of the mother is also at risk. So meaning if you have to choose one or the other. But if I were to be able to go and talk to that child and have a conversation and say to that child, do you want to live? We would assume the child would say, yes, I do. And as long as we assume that that child would say, yes, I want to live, then it is our responsibility to protect that child's life. That's how we feel about it. So people will say, well, what about the right of the mother? The right of the mother was taken away when she when she had sex, when she made that choice. When you have sex, you are making the choice that you're willing to forfeit your right if you get pregnant. That's how I feel about it. Listening, and somebody says, well, you're going to force a mother or a woman to raise a child that she does not want, or to carry a child that she doesn't want. I'm not going to force her to do that. She made that choice.
There's a
There's all sorts of options. She made that choice. I did not put her in bed with that guy. Now, pastor, what about rape? It's an ugly thing. There's a special place in hell for those people. But still, go talk to the child and say, I'm sorry you were born in such a way or conceived in such a way. Do you want to live? And the child will say, yes. Well, then you have that right. So that's how we look at it. We always look at it from the right of the perspective of the child. Sometimes do things happen to us and we have to live with the unintentional consequences of that tragedy all the time. And it's awful, it's terrible, it's horrible, it's horrific. There's nothing good about it. But that child is still a child, still a human being, still created by God, still loved by God, still redeemed by Jesus' death on the cross. And they have a right to life, no matter what.
I may see civil disobedience a little differently because you're talking about exercising your rights as a citizen to speak out against. So I'm thinking of, when do I say I'm not going to follow that law because it causes me to violate my relationship?
Yeah, so when we talk about civil disobedience, I mean, that's, I guess, not so much disobedience because we have built into our rights as a country the right to speak out against that and to protest and to assemble in that nature. I think whenever the government would burden, so I'm going to go back to this word, whenever the government would burden the conscience of a person according to their faith. So let me step outside of maybe my Christian faith and just say this in general. Now I'm going to get a little deep into politics, maybe a little bit. The U.S. Constitution is an amazing document. It truly is. When you really study it and when you really dive into it, the whole premise of our Constitution was the one thing that's going to mess this great thing up that we have that's called the United States of America. The one thing, right? When they were writing this, there's like the one thing that's going to mess it all up is what? What's the one thing that can mess this dream up that we have, that is our country that we get to live in right now? No, it's not to get rid of God. There's one thing that's going to mess it up. And the founders of the Constitution knew this. Okay, whose power? Or just the government? The one thing that can mess this whole thing up is the government. America was founded under the premise that there are good people who will make good decisions on behalf of their society. Now, you may disagree with that, but that's how it was founded. So the whole Constitution was written so that America would take a lesser position and that the citizens would take a greater position. The whole thing was written to reduce government, lower government, reduce government, lesser government, right? And it was written as such. And it was written, oops, I pushed a button. Okay, I unpushed it. So it was written in such a way that it gave rights, inalienable rights, you've heard those terms before, to the people, right? And so that the people could determine their fate in sense of pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? So it gave them those rights. And it says now if people want to, they get to decide that course of action. There's something you could say is incredibly amazing about that. There's something you could say is incredibly dangerous about that. Because what if the people decide they want to go somewhere else? Well, our government was founded in a way that says they have the right to choose that. We hope they don't. There was two things that they put above themselves, right? And they said the one was the Constitution itself and the laws itself, and they put God as well. The Constitution, whether we like it or not, pays homage to God. It tips a hat towards God. It says, okay, God, you ultimately are the sovereign one over all of us. It is written in it. The founding fathers knew that and recognized that. Whether the people recognize it or not it's a moot point in my opinion. The founding fathers recognized it. And when we understand and interpret the Constitution and read it, we need to recognize that they understood that. Because when we understand their mind a little better, it helps us understand what they were trying to create in the Constitution. I'm not a libertarian, by the way. In case y'all are wondering, this is not the voice of a libertarian. I'm not saying no government. I do believe that we need a government. But government needs to know its role. And government steps on people's toes, and civil disobedience is right and appropriate when government starts to burden the conscience of people, regardless of what that conscience is. So your conscience may be different than your conscience, and the government shouldn't burden either one of yours with its laws.
I know in the case of public schools, Amish, for example, don't have to send their kids to public schools, I think, after a certain age. And they'll come through the court system and test that, because you can say it's really civil disobedience, it's conscientious objection, I think is what they would say. And so they'll look at the history of your faith and how long you've actually believed that, you know, because I may say speeding 75 miles an hour is what I want to do because 70 burdens my conscience.
Yeah, we do this with vaccinations all the time.
And so they'll say, well, where did you get that from? And I'll say, from my faith that I just started yesterday to protest the speed limit, you know. And so they'll test your history of your faith and things like that. But I was just curious, in light of this, when do you...
I know a ton of pastors who do not get vaccinated, and they will claim religious exemption because of it. And I was like, but you and I are the same religion. And it's fine. If they don't want to get a vaccine, that's a different story, different conversation, different question. But I was like, but don't you're lying. It is not according to your faith to not do that. Now, it may be according to your, you might be a conscientious objector, you know, you may, according to your conscience, but it's not according to your faith. Here's an example. I can't remember the religion, and so bear with me, but there's a faith, an Eastern faith, I want to say Middle Eastern even, that at a certain age you have to carry a dagger on your hip.
Sikhs.
It's the Sikhs, thank you. And this created a big problem, I think, in California, because all of a sudden you had a whole community of Sikhs going to public schools. And when they go to the public schools, guess what they have to have with them? Their dagger needs to be, that is part of their faith. That is not a, and it was awesome to see the Christian church body stand up beside the Sikhs and say, no, you cannot forbid them from doing this. They have a right to carry that dagger. But that's a weapon in school. It may be, but that is their conscience. You are burdening their conscience to take that away from them. The one thing I like about our current synodical president, and I said that maybe poorly, but it's true, he does a great job in the church interacting with the civil realm. He really does. He started an organization called the Lutheran something of civil liberty. You'll learn it. If you look on the page here, and so this will be fun because if you're watching this online, you can be able to just actually click the link. The indented part is if you type that in, if you're able to click on it, you can click that top part. There's two different ones. The first one is from Reverend Dr. Greg Seltz, who was so it's really cool. You have Reverend Dr. Greg Seltz. He was a Lutheran hour speaker, being interviewed by Reverend Dr. Dale Meyer, who also was a Lutheran hour speaker. And Dale Meyer was the president of Concordia Seminary for many years. Dale Meyer is an incredible man, and so is Dr. Greg Seltz. But they're talking about this. Y'all, I want to really encourage you to go and watch that first video. If you're going to watch one of them, I would say please watch that first one. The second one was Dr. Dale Meyer and Dr. Bierman, who was my professor I had him for I think 5 or 6 classes. I really liked him, so I just kept taking his class again. Dr. Bierman's great. I would encourage you to watch that one too. But man, I sure did love listening to Dr. Seltz. So do that. You can type that in. If you have problems, I bet if you Google that top part, it'll pull right up for you. Because one of the things that we're starting to see more and more and more of, I'm just going to say it, is the government starting to infringe upon the conscience of the people. that is happening. Okay, this is not me getting political. This is just a fact. It is happening. So what's our response? Churches get a little whiny. Our response is to be the church. And just be the church. What does that mean? Proclaim Jesus. Proclaim his grace. Should we get involved? Absolutely. What happens if they say you're no longer allowed to proclaim Jesus? What do? Proclaim Jesus. Do we change anything? It's maybe how we do it, but we just keep doing it. So one of the things that Dr. Bierman talks about is the tax exempt status. Churches right now are tax exempt. That's part of our. It's part of it's just always been that way. If it will happen eventually, I agreed with Dr. Bierman. I don't think it's going to happen as soon as everyone's afraid it's going to happen, but I do think we're just heading that direction. It'll happen. When they take our tax exempt status away, should we be upset? I don't know, maybe get upset, but pay your taxes and do what? Proclaim Jesus, right? I mean, it just doesn't change a whole lot. That's our primary goal. Should we fight for people to have the right of religious freedom? Absolutely. Yes, we should. We should fight for the right for the government to stay out of the conscience of believers. We should do that. Why? Because again, what is God's will? Is God's will that people would be free to go to him and to hear his word and to hear his name proclaimed? Absolutely. So we should fight for that. So we say, okay, if this was the kingdom of God, how would God have made it? Well, God would have made it so people can hear the good news. Well, then let's fight for that. So it's okay to fight for these things. In the end, we don't need to be whiners about it. What we need to do is just be the church. Our response really is to double down on who we are as people of faith, not complain that the government has no power over us. We believe greater than that. The government can put all the sanctions and all the burdens and all the laws and all the suppression it wants on us. Should we care? It shouldn't change anything. We should gladly go to jail. We should gladly take our punishments. We should gladly pay our fines. And we should continue to double down in being the church. I truly believe that. So let it come. Should we fight for it? Yes. If we lose, it doesn't change anything. Yes, sir.
I was just going to say, for example, the bakers who don't want to bake the cake, and then they get fined, and they just keep paying it, keep doing it. I mean, until they just shut you down and you just go home with your tail between your legs. I mean, that's basically all you can do at that point, right? Other than continue.
Yeah. You shut you down, and so you can fight it. I think it's okay to fight it in court. But in the end, continue to be the church.
What's the law that's currently before Congress? Because Harrison.
The Equality Act.
Yeah, that's the one you wrote on in the last Lutheran Witness that was really pretty much along the lines of what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote I thought it was a brilliant piece on here's what the church is doing.
Yeah, where can you find that?
It's in the Lutheran Witness. I don't know if it's in the one that's out there now or it was the last
I
one.
think it's probably, I'll try to find that.
Online, but it was a great piece that talks about the very thing. Here's what the church is doing. Here's what the Word of God says. Here's what the church in the U.S. is doing. But here's what the Word of God says. And here's what our role is. And it's all very much along the lines of what you're saying.
Yeah. You fight, but at the same time, don't ever lose sight of what is our first priority, just to be the church. And so we can kind of, it's not a either or, it's a both and. It's not that, we lost. Now, no, they can't win. The government cannot win. You realize it's not that it is physically impossible. If they suppress all speech of Christianity, you think Christianity is going away in America? No way. In fact, that would be the first thing they did that made it grow.
But that's what a lot of people are so afraid.
Yes. We don't need to be afraid.
Well, the fastest growing church is in Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't need to be afraid. God is still sovereign and good. We're past time.
I didn't stop.
You didn't. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to read the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech, the press, the right of the people peacefully to assemble, and the petition of the government for redress of grievances. There you go. Thank you. Sorry I went past time. Go in peace and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.